All right. Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Allison. Pronouns are she, her. I'm the executive director of the Gallatin County Democrats. It is wonderful to be with you all again in Zoom. I'm so excited for the day when we can be in person together. But for now, this works pretty well because we get to have people from around the state join us, which is awesome. So before we begin, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the gratitude we have towards the many Indigenous nations who call this valley their homelands. Many thanks to the Blackfeet, Crow, Shoshone, and others who have lived here since time immemorial and protected the waters, land, air, and animals. May we proceed with the spirit of respect and generosity that these nations have displayed. And credit to Dr. Shane Doyle for that land's acknowledgement. So with us tonight, we have Senator J.P. Pomnichowski and Representative Alice Buckley. Thank you both for being here tonight. I know that, well, everyone's exhausted, and I just want to acknowledge that you are taking time out of your break to be with us tonight. So thank you for doing that with us this evening. I know we all appreciate it. So if the two of you, so I'm going to have a question that I'm going to pose, but in the meantime, if anyone wants to introduce yourself in the chat, say where you're from, you can start posting questions, use reactions as much as you want. I love that as Zoom has progressed over the last year, we get more reactions like the hearts and the celebrations. I think that's really kind of fun. So my first question is just a general one. I know we're kind of talking about business and taxes and natural resources and whatever else comes up in this conversation. But what has been most surprising to you so far this session? And Alice, I'm going to let you go first, since it's your first session.
Oh my gosh. I mean, that's such a good question. And we were just like JP and I were joking about this because it's my first session and everything. It's such an interesting, unprecedented session in so many ways that I feel like I'm normalizing a lot of things, and it's hard. Everything feels surprising to me. And then really quickly we recalibrate. But what feels most surprising? I think maybe just the fact that it's just 150 humans from around the state who are thrown into this experience where over the course of 90 days we need to make decisions on behalf of the state for 2 years. And it's such a huge responsibility. It's such a big privilege, and we're also all just humans. And so the Senate finished up at midnight. They started at 7:30 and finished up at midnight on Monday. We finished up on Tuesday, but we're putting in really long hours. We're having to make decisions about a whole host of issues, very few of which we are, if any, we're experts on. And so just the process, I think it's a real ritual of humility to try to do good work. And that's just an interesting, messy, wonderful, surprising process to be involved in. And I think the only orientation we can all have to it is one of humility and appreciation. So it's interesting.
Thank you.
I think for me, it's just been a really stark difference, a stark illustration on the importance of checks and balances. Here's what I mean. My first session was 2007 under a Democratic governor. And in that session, it was a Republican majority. In the next, it was a 50-50 House and a Democratic Senate. In 2011, it was the Tea Party sweep. And then since then, it's been a Republican majority in the legislature and a Democratic governor. Checks and balances. And now it is a completely Republican, all statewide offices, the governor's office, agency directors, the Republican majority in the legislature. And the character of this session is very, very different. Alice, I'll be so interested to talk with you after this session just to get your perspective, because and maybe to share some from previous sessions where it just it just feels much more scorched earth type of politics than I've ever seen.
Yeah, that certainly is how I am perceiving it all the time. We were talking in the last conversation about the social engineering that we're seeing in these bills, and that phrase social engineering is it's like such a perfect description for what bills we've actually encountered. Not bills that will help, working families or increase wages or create jobs. It's the social engineering that we're seeing. So that's not really the topic of the conversation for tonight, but I'm sure that'll bubble up at various times. So we claimed that tonight's topic would be about taxes and business and natural resources, because those are the committees that you serve on in general. So we do have some questions that are going to start bubbling up, and feel free, if anyone would like to raise your hand and ask the question, I'll call on you, or feel free to put it in the chat. But our first question, so the Missoula Current had an article today about mistreatment of Democrats by Republicans during this session. We all watched the February 23rd judiciary hearing in which Marianne Dunwell was muted. I think that was on her House resolution for the white supremacy groups, or against the white supremacist groups. Can you comment on this? There seemed to be a strong element of misogyny at work as well. So who wants to take that?
Hop in just from my perspective on the House, and then JP, I'll pass it to you for your perspective on the Senate and just maybe a longer term view as well. But that has been my experience. And I think an interesting dynamic is that Republicans have a supermajority in the House. They have all 5 statewide offices, the second floor as well. And they have everything they need to pass a conservative agenda and to get their policies and priorities through. And so it's fascinating to watch what feels to me like so much of their energy and effort going into belittling and bullying Democrats. And that's nitpicking small things. It's spending energy marginalizing folks in hearings. It's the instances you talked about with Marianne. I've seen it happen a couple other times during committee hearings. And it's just interesting because it's inflammatory and provocative. I feel, and I could talk about this all night, but I feel so proud of our Democratic caucus. We are being resilient, we're standing up, we're showing up, we're speaking up. And I think we're doing a good job of responding to that with graciousness. And yet it's challenging to be present in, and it's happening again in big ways and then in small ways, but there's a tenor on the House floor where there's heckling, there's disruption when we talk. And I think our minority leader, Kim Abbott, has done a really nice job of knowing when to stand up. But it's challenging. And again, I just feel really proud of how our caucus has done in the midst of that. JP, I'll pass it off to you.
Well, Alice hit on a really important aspect. The majority always has the power, right? They can schedule bills, they can assign committee assignments, they can defeat or pass whatever legislation they wish. But this session, and just keep in mind that since 1972, when we adopted, we passed as a state our new state constitution. We established things like the Judicial Nominating Commission to depoliticize the appointment of judges to the bench. And through Republican and Democratic governors, through Republican and Democratic majorities, we have not tampered with that since 1972. And it came into being because judicial appointments were too partisan. We recognized that we did not want that, and we changed that in our state constitution. And so what's being proposed by the Gianforte administration? Oh, that's right. Gubernatorial appointments to the bench, doing away with the Judicial Nominating Commission. And you know what? The Republican majorities don't need to change the rules of the game when they are running the table with the majorities. You don't need to change the rules. They've also changed, the Republican majorities, with the support of the governor, is trying to make the interim, which is typically a bipartisan, even numbers appointed from senators and representatives, Republicans and Democrats, to interim committees. They're trying to make those partisan. We were able, we think, to defeat that idea in the Senate. But here's another thing that's just so disappointing to see. So there are so many talented board and commission members on all kinds of boards all across through the state. The Human Rights Commission, the Board of Labor Appeals, now known as the Board of Personnel Appeals, for anyone who has an unemployment claim, or for an employer who has an unemployment, someone claiming unemployment. There's a board that deals with that. There are the Fish, Wildlife, and Parks boards. All of these nominations, typically, when a new governor comes in, there are some board members who are midterm, and just as a pro forma type of thing, if you are middle of your term, your nomination just carry forward. And if there is an opening, then the nomination is heard by the Senate. And the Senate is the only one to confirm nominations. These don't go to the House. But this year, Governor Gianforte, starting with the Board of Public Education, right after his win in November, sent a letter to everyone serving on the Board of Public Ed saying, thank you for your service, you're done. Well, then they had to backpedal a bit, because that is not the way we do this. So if you are a board member and you are midterm, although I have to say this, the State Tax Appeal Board had a board member in 2 years into his 4-year term, and he was unseated. And the former Senator Fred Thomas was just confirmed to his seat. This is just, there is no reason to unseat people who have the knowledge, the experience, the education, the fortitude, and the willingness to serve on boards and commissions, where these are very complicated issues, and you want talented board members, no matter who they are, no matter which governor appointed them. If I come before a certain board or commission, I want to know that those board members know that topic. It's not a political appointment. It's not about, well, and then we're appointing more board members to represent certain sectors. It's just, this is not the way we've ever done it, no matter who the majority is, no matter who the governor is. We don't unseat, we don't pluck people out of their seats of the middle of their terms. I mean, it's just egregious this time, really egregious.
It's probably the best word to use for this entire session, egregious. It's all just egregious. So kind of along those lines, do you think that this scorched earth will last? Or do you think this is like Susan Collins saying Trump was going to learn from his mistakes? And JP also comment on the importance of varying splits in the legislature. So I think maybe about the moderate versus more hard right, what you're seeing there.
Well,
I think that's what Elizabeth means.
I'll start, but then I think that is more illustrative in the House, actually. So the first part of that question, no, I don't think there's any learning from the scorched earth. The point of the scorched earth is to winner take all. And that's the goal. Part of it though, I hope that the legislature acts like its own separate branch of government, which we are, representing the people, right? I mean, the governor's office drives a lot of this through the Republican majority, and that is just going to be true. And a lot of legislators feel like, oh, finally, it's been a long time coming. The Republicans on occasion have made comments like, and now it's almost a badge of honor if someone is bringing a bill that was vetoed previously. That almost guarantees its passage by the Republican majority because they think, oh, finally, no Democrat to veto my bill. Well, some of these weren't vetoed just because of politics. Sometimes it's a constitutional issue. Sometimes it's federal law, which preempts or supersedes state law, right? The supremacy clause means that you're an American first. And so if there's a federal law, it applies first, and whatever is not determined there can be determined by the states. But no, I don't think there's any, room for grace right now. We're just completing the second month of this administration, and I think it's just going to be trying to get all the chips on the table, all of them. And then Alice, I think, might have a better perspective for some of the splits in the Republican caucus. That's probably a little more obvious on the House side. Alice?
Yeah. Well, and I think too, I mean, there's just so much pent up, I think, frustration on the part of Republicans over the past 16 years. And so there's this frenzy to pass a conservative agenda. I've also been reflecting on another dynamic, which is that in the House, there's 67 Republicans, there are 33 Democrats, but on any given day, half of our caucus is participating remotely. And so I think another aspect is, I think for Republicans looking over at Democrats, there are just so few of us there that it also lends itself to a bit of a scorched earth mentality, perhaps, just because there are, I don't know, it probably, I'd speculate that maybe it feels easier to kind of push things forward than try to be bipartisan or collaborative. But I don't know. I have to test out my theory a little bit more, or my hypothesis. But it's been really interesting to see the various dynamics in the Republican Party, and I don't want to speak. I don't want to speak for the Republicans, or can't guess the inner workings of what's going on in their caucus of 67. But it does seem like I will say it seems easier to hold together a team of 33 than it does a team of 67. And I've been surprised that we have defeated bills brought by some of the most conservative members of the House. And we defeated a number of those on Monday and Tuesday right before transmittal. And it just felt really interesting to me to see that maybe there was less alignment around the far right than I would have imagined. And another really interesting dynamic is that if Governor Gianforte wants to get reelected, he has to be strategic and thoughtful about what legislation makes it on his desk. And so I think he's leaning on Republicans to prevent some of that legislation from coming forward. And it just feels really interesting to think about how all that's shaking out.
I could share too, this is pretty typical. So Democrats in the minority, just consider that from 2011, so 10 solid years. Last session, I think some of you have heard me talk about last session in the Senate. It was 30 and 20, 30 Republicans, 20 Democrats. So clearly, I mean, it takes, it's a 50-person chamber, so it takes half plus one to get anything passed, at least 26 votes. So there were times when we would have our 20, which is not enough to pass anything. But then, depending on the different divisions in the Republican caucus, you would have moderate, mostly fiscally minded Republicans. You'd have pretty right-wing, ideological, almost libertarian Republicans who on occasion would go for things like alternative energy because they love the idea of the personal independence and be living off the grid, not having to subscribe to anything. So and then you'd have another which might be really quite maybe like the religious kind of group in the Republican majority. So on any given day, if we were trying to pass, say, alternative energy legislation, it would be 20 of us and maybe 10 Republicans, and the thing would pass 30 to 20. Or if it were, you get the idea. So, but that presumes that the Democrats are going to hold at 20. Which often we do. I think it's right to say that the minority, it might be easier to hold the majority as the minority, and that's always been an interesting split. But this time right now we are 31 and 19 in the Senate and 67 and 33 in the House. I mean, we're crushed, right? So we can stand and make the arguments. And one thing about the Senate that's very different from the House is that I'm in my 7th session, and I think I've served with the majority of people in the Senate all my career. So the House is, even with regardless of term limits, the turnover in the House is sometimes 30 to 40% new people every time. So whatever longevity you have, whatever institutional knowledge, or depending on which Senate seats are opening up the next time, you just don't quite have the institutional knowledge, the experience, the relationships. So we have as many people or more of the Democratic caucus participating remotely via Zoom. But we still have more decorum in the Senate than is present in the House. And I think a lot of it is because we have just been shoulder to shoulder in fights and legislating for all these years together. And so I think there just may be, oh God, I should knock on wood, a little more respect. I don't know. Did you hear me knock? Here, I'll knock louder.
There you go. Yeah, just a smidge, maybe a smidge. That's a great observation. And Alice, I think that's an interesting hypothesis about, the virtual participation and how that also changes dynamics in the House. I hadn't actually thought about that, but that makes sense. When you're not physically present, do you still have a presence? But yet to be remote is a decision that is really important to have. And so I'm grateful that every legislator has that choice and that you can participate remotely. So kind of turning it to what's actually been going on in your committees and maybe kind of the broad themes of, what what we've seen the first half of the session and what comes next. We just had a conversation about the budget, and most of us who are here on this one actually were in that one. So I think we're feeling fairly confident, and at least I don't know if I'm feeling confident ever, but like kind of get the understanding of the budget, that's really the heart of what happens during the second part of the session. But you both serve on taxation, right? Yeah, you're both in taxation. So what's the revenue side of things? Like what's the taxation side? How is that looking right now for us, for Montana?
Well, I wonder if that's such a good question, Allison, and I want to put a pin in that, but it would be really, a conversation I'd appreciate is the governor's pushing a number of tax policies as part of his comeback plan, and so a handful of them have started in the Senate and a handful of them have started in the House, and that's been a really interesting thing for me to observe. So if it's all right, it would be interesting for me to, JP, if you don't mind, just kind of telling us about some of the bills that you're sending over to House tax, and I can kind of talk about a couple of the ones that are being pushed by Governor Gianforte that we've been seeing.
Sure. Well, people might know that Governor Gianforte is touting what he calls the comeback plan. And for the state, which is rated number one, the number one state in which to start a small business is Montana, which begs the question, come back from what? How much better can we get? We're number one right now. We have a progressive tax policy, which means progressive versus regressive. Progressive means that everyone is overall taxed at about the same rate. Regressive means that those of lower income are taxed more than those of a high income. And I can tell you, and this is just going to be the in a nutshell version. I'll try to give you like the 25 words or less descriptions here, but and I'll talk about bills, but let me just back up and give a little bit of perspective about the revenue estimate. So the general fund of Montana is made up primarily of income tax, whether that's personal income tax or corporate income tax. That's about 55% of our revenue. And so whatever people are paying from working is really, this is the same idea, right? Taxation, government is the word we use for the things we do together. If I put in a penny and you put in a penny and everybody puts in a penny, then we can have a fire department and we don't all need a fire engine in our driveways, right? This is what we do together. So changing tax policy means that someone is going to pay. Someone's going to pay. And right now, we talk about tax fairness, and that is really what we mean. But what we've seen, there are a few main tax proposals from Governor Gianforte. One, which I'm sure will be messaged as an income tax break. For people earning $35,000 a year, your income tax break will be $12. That might be enough to buy a pizza, maybe. Not even really one of the good pizzas. Just a pizza over the whole year is your tax break. And so in the early days, this idea, this income tax break was being touted as, yes, people who are higher income, like $1 million or more a year, will use their tax break and they might hire more people. They might invest in equipment for a business. They might improve a business, that kind of thing. Well, okay. But a person earning about $1 million a year will get about $1,200 in a tax break, an income tax break, which is not enough to hire a new employee. It's not enough to invest in new equipment for your business. That's not enough either. But what this income tax break will give is a tax break to the wealthiest among us. And it will cost about $30 million a year. $30 million a year. that buys a lot of programs, that paves roads, that funds mental health, or it could. But now that's what the cost of that income tax break will be. And so just for my part, and believe me, it's been a tough year for me too, but I would rather just, keep my $12 and pool it with your $12 and your $12 and your $12. And can we please do something about our roads and bridges and our mental health and maybe schools? I mean, really, that's the idea. There's another tax break, which, this one drives me to distraction. This one is called the Montana Entrepreneur Magnet Act. That's how it's being billed. Oh God, I just honestly, the Republican naming of ideas, this one purports to draw wealthy entrepreneurs to Montana, but what it really is a capital gains tax cut. So capital gains, right, is a profit on the sale of stock. That's what that is. I don't know. I mean, capital gains, just such a strange term. I've never liked the term capital gains. So here's how to think of this. If you are working your job every day and you earn $50,000 a year, your income is taxed at 4.8%. You're going to pay 4.8% in income tax, and it's just going to come off of every check, and you don't think about it, and that's the way of it. And then that money comes to our general fund and pays for a lot of stuff. But someone who gets $50,000 in profit from the sale of stock now pays 2.8%, which would go to zero. So the people who are showing up every day and working their jobs and earning a certain amount are going to still be taxed at 4.8%. There's no savings for them. Someone selling stock doesn't even get taxed at almost half the rate of the working person, but at zero. I don't understand. I mean, there are ways to structure tax policy, and we have talked about increasing the earned income tax credit, which really does help our hardworking, low-income Montanans. And that's what we are. We are hardworking, low-income. Sorry, I'm going off. Allison, you'll be able to speak here in another 15, 20 minutes. I'm on a roll. I'm teasing. But those are some of the tax ideas that are being put forward. And they're for the wealthy. They reward wealth over work. And the income tax break is not going to be enough for anybody to do anything with, and it will cost our cumulative contributions to the detriment of what we all benefit from. I mean, it could be firefighting services, it could be any number of things, but that's not what we should be losing $30 million for. IMHO.
Agreed. I share that opinion, and I think others on this call do as well. Alice, what about some of the tax bills that you've seen that you've sent over to the Senate?
Yeah, I mean, I think JP did a really nice job summarizing the goals of the governor, or at least where his tax policy fits into his overall goals. But if I were to summarize it, at least what we've seen on the House side, it's that we're balancing tax cuts on the back of working Montanans to incentivize out-of-state corporations to come in and do business in Montana. And he's done that in a number of ways. We've seen a business equipment tax cut, and we sent that straight over to the Senate. We've seen a tax credit for businesses to put their workers through job training. And again, I think a lot of these are not inherently bad, but what we've been trying to say in tax committee, what we've been trying to say on the House floor is these aren't effective or targeted or focused enough. And let's focus on actual Montanans. Let's focus on working Montanans instead of giving businesses And in many cases, these are out-of-state corporations, tax incentives or tax cuts, which is just really interesting. I mean, it's a totally different tax theory, right? To be prioritizing businesses instead of, I think, what we're all trying to see, which is prioritizing low and middle income folks across the state.
Right. And I think that I think I've actually heard Representative Jim Hamilton say this, but like no one moves for taxes. And just kind of thinking about these perceptions that, these tax cuts are going to attract large corporations or other businesses to Montana. And I'm just going to throw this out there because this is where I have been focused on a lot and yet we're seeing all these really discriminatory bills being passed, and states actually lose business by having this type of discriminatory legislation come into law. So thinking about the anti-LGBTQ laws, the the healthcare, limiting healthcare access, all this kind of stuff, I think that actually detracts from businesses. And so, how like that's just an observation I wanted to throw out there, that I've noticed that too, that we're saying we're attracting businesses while not supporting current businesses and working Montanans, and also discriminating against current Montana, like people who actually live here and are trying to make a life and just live their life, so that's just an observation. Throw that out there.
Just before we move
Yeah.
on, Alice, you reminded me. So when I was speaking about some of these tax bills on the Senate floor the other day, there was a Republican chairman who there's always someone who conducts the floor session. And so, and Allison, what you said is spot on. And so the comment that I made was, this is not a tax policy for which someone will move to Montana or move a business to Montana. And the example that I gave was, everybody in this chamber, I would like you to imagine if New Jersey changed its tax policy tomorrow, would you pick up and move to New Jersey? If West Virginia came up with a better income tax policy, would you move to West Virginia? And back to, meanwhile, being a woman in the legislature, Alice and I know this, the misogyny, right? The chairman said, if we could keep the comment to the bill. And I thought, how is this not on the bill? This is a state's tax policy that's being purported to be a magnet. That's the term. It was completely, that same comment would not have been addressed to, I'm confident, a male legislator. But those are exactly the points I made. Tax policy does not, this is not going to be a draw, right? If anything, it's going to be that someone can, if they even file income tax in Montana, they can, or we're going to draw millionaires here so that they can sell their stock and get a bigger income tax break. That's why we want to draw people to Montana. For heaven's sake, how about benefiting the people who are making their lives here and contributing to society and raising their families and working a hard day's work every day? How about us? How about us?
Yeah, absolutely. How about the rest of us? Do you have any examples of what kind of corporations the Gianforte administration is actually trying to attract? Has there been any like specific type of industry or specific examples?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Apart from, I think attracting, certainly trying to incentivize tech is the one that I've heard of probably called out. I think a better distinction to make is that a lot of Main Street businesses, small businesses, ag operations already have business equipment tax credits in place. They already have the opportunity to access a lot of this. So and that's another point that we've been trying to make. It's really only hitting businesses that really big Montana businesses or larger corporations based out of state that again, that would be potentially incentivized to move here. And those were really good points that both of you made on how there's no examples out there of tax incentives encouraging migration.
Yeah. And as far as attracting tech to locate here, we have a thriving tech environment already here, especially in Gallatin County, in Missoula, Kalispell, even a little bit has it, like there's these tech bubbles. And, that I just don't know how this stuff is going to really benefit even the current existing tech companies. So there aren't any other questions that have been posted, so don't be shy, friends. If you have a question, or raise your hand and you can ask. And we have about 15 more minutes left, so we have a little bit more time. Is there anything maybe outside of the taxation and kind of the revenue? Maybe Alice, if you want to talk about some of your bills that you've been able to get through the House, kind of maybe talking about some of the wins, that would be, I think we need to also talk about the wins that we've been having, because there have been some wins, like there have been some good things.
Yeah, I would be happy to. Maybe I'll just pause for a second and see if there are any questions from anyone here. I don't see any. Yeah, I'd be happy to. I have had 3 bills move through the House, which will land in the Senate once the Senate recovers from this past week and reconvenes after transmittal.
We're stronger than we look. I just, it was a sympathetic audience, so I thought I'd, cry on your shoulder a little bit about the 17-hour day or something. Sorry, go ahead, Alice.
Criminal. And no, it's good to be, good to be on break. A bill that I carried on behalf of the city of Bozeman that made a small tweak in election law to allow our elections to be a bit more efficient, and to have some cost savings associated with it. That was a small one that moved through state administration. A bill in the world of supporting victims of sexual assault that wrote on a really amazing bill that passed through the legislature in 2019, and just is a small addition to that to help support victims of rape and sexual assault. That moved through the Judiciary Committee, and then a third bill allowing folks to use campaign funds for childcare expenses incurred while a candidate is campaigning, which I've just been thinking so much about how to remove barriers to running for office and what it looks like to create more accessibility and transparency. So this is a really small step there. And it was, it moved through state administration, was such a food fight on the House floor, just blew up, barely squeaked by. And we'll see if the wisdom in the Senate prevails on this, but I'm really hopeful that because it's kind of calmed down, that it won't be as contentious in the Senate. It was personally offensive to some of my Republican colleagues, and there's just not the same, I don't think there was quite the same rancor in the Senate. So we'll see how those go. And then I have a bail reform or pretrial services bill that I'll bring after transmittal, along with a bill I'm working on with Senator Walt Sales from the Gallatin County. So it should be fun. I'm hopeful for what life looks like after we return from transmittal, with a little bit more sanity for all of us, I think.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.
Hopefully.
So I do have a fun bill to relate to everyone. So in past sessions, I've carried, I think a lot of people know, I carry a lot of natural resources legislation, water quality, water quantity, also a lot of bills for sportsmen. So in my career, I've carried bills for, well, you are right now able to buy your fishing license or your hunting license and have it on your phone. It's a digital license, and digital tags also. I carried those. I carried one, I don't know, 8 or 10 years ago for free fishing licenses for Purple Heart recipients, all that kind of stuff. But the greatest thing I may ever have done for sportsmen in the state of Montana is to allow the sale of beer and wine before 8 a.m. So thank you. Who of us has not gotten up at dark 30, gotten, you load the cooler and the waiters and the fishing rods and the kids and the dog, and you all hit the road and you drive for the river and you stop right, for me, it's Livingston before a Yellowstone River put in, or, you get the idea, right? And all you go and you want to buy your sandwich and your chips and your chocolate bars and your couple bags of ice and your beer, and you can't buy the beer because right now the law says no beer and wine sales 2 a.m. to 8 a.m. So I managed to pass the bill out of the Senate. For the love of God, Alice, come on, the House has got to pass this bill to allow, and it's just permissive. It's not going to change it for everybody. If there's some store that doesn't open till 8, they don't have to all of a sudden open at 6. That's not the thing. But if you are a retailer, and this is all for off-premises consumption, this is not opening bars at 6 a.m. It's nothing like that, or liquor stores. But if you just want to, stock your cooler before you launch the boat and start fishing, you're welcome. This is the bill I'm bringing. I put in a lot of bill drafts, and I'm very proud that a lot of people have been able to use some of the bill titles that I put in. And I learned many moons ago especially when I became a member of the leadership team, to put in bill drafts and bill titles, because as the session moves on and people are very busy and we all are limited in the number of bill drafts we can bring after the session convenes, all of a sudden there aren't any. And so I do have bills that were my original bill titles. So you'll see that I have a long list: election law, minimum wage, resolutions on the 75th anniversary of World War II coming to an end, all that kind of stuff. They're under my name, but they're actually being carried by other legislators. So I'm attached, I guess you could say, but just tangentially. I mean, look, there are a lot of good bills moving through the session. They're just being overshadowed by a lot more bad bills that are moving through the session. And it's just because the winds of change have given us Republican majorities in the legislature, Republican statewide, and a governor. It's not to say that these are better ideas that finally are going to get hatched. It's just that that is the political reality. And honestly, the term checks and balances, I mean, maybe it just needs to be, the brakes and the gas pedal, right? Somebody's got to hit the brakes every once in a while and just balance this thing out. And I really think we need to, I like the comment, beer, it's not just for breakfast anymore. You're welcome. Honestly, if you want to start the day with your red beer, I did that. Yeah, it's just, please keep your eye on the session, and elections matter. Alice, you said, and I love the bill that you've brought, but for those of us who are also watchers of the Daily Show, that's one of my guilty pleasures, and has been since Jon Stewart had it. One of the organizations named the other day was called She Should Run.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, honestly, man or woman Democrats, I just need more of you. But I think women typically just it doesn't occur to them, or they don't think they can, or they think they need to be a policy expert before they even consider putting their name out there. She Should Run. Please look into it. And Alice, thank you for your efforts. But basically, I love the Democratic men too. So just please, for the love of Mike, tell your Democratic friends to run far, run wide, run in districts that are, not in the heart of Bozeman. You can run in any district in the county. There are lots of us who've been down this road. We will help you. We need to get our checks and balances back, which means if it's going to be Governor Gianforte for the next 2 years, and of course it is, it's a 4-year term, then Jesus, Mary and Joseph, give me a Democratic majority in one chamber or the other. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Run, please. Yes. Reach out if you have questions about that. It's never too early to start running either. I think there's a lot of conversation about that as well, that, we need to start doing that sooner. It's the reality. We need to build relationships, build funds, all of, organizing capacity for the organizations as well, like the Gallatin County Democrats, we this is a year-round thing anymore. It can't just be, by the filing deadline of the election year. Like, this is year-round. So there are a few more questions that have been asked. We only have a few more minutes, so we may not get to all of them. So Elizabeth asked, tax is complicated, but do you think there is any conversation to be had on tax policy that is more progressive rather than the governor's tax cut for millionaires?
I can hop in on that. I think there is. A bipartisan, fortunately, a bipartisan issue is property tax relief, and we've seen a couple of bills come through the House. One that we haven't passed yet, but will pass, is a bill brought by a Republican, revising the elderly homeowner tax credit. And it's great because this is a bill that's been brought by Democratic legislators, has never made it very far through the process, is now going to get through. But this is great, and it's a really small step, and it's a very small revision. It's a very small step, but it is a way to move the needle. And I think more than anything, it's making me think about the work to do in the interim to think about more progressive tax policies that align with that have a path forward through the process, and might align with the governor's goals. So that's interesting to me. And then the bigger sweeping changes, we've just so swiftly and thoroughly tabled in tax, but it's been a really great example for Democratic legislators to expand the earned income tax credit. Others that have been really important, and at least we get to say, hey, we're trying to show up and pass policy that works for Montanans, and all y'all Republicans are not doing any of that. And as you said before, Allison, we don't even have to, it's not even talking points. It's that all we've seen from our Republican colleagues are that they're passing their conservative agenda, and it's a conservative agenda that is focused on marginalizing and discriminating and restricting the rights and privacy and health decisions of Montanans, and isn't actually helping folks across the state. So it's just happening. It's not, there's no messaging to spin on that. We're just all seeing that play out, and it'll be really interesting to see what happens over the next couple of years with that.
Yeah, thank you. So another, I think these next two questions might be quicker questions. So I'm going to skip yours, Alice Robinson, just for a second and go to Elizabeth's second one. Can budget bills be submitted at a later date since they're ruled on, like they have a later date than this transmittal break, right? So we may see some more budget bills, right?
Yep.
Yes, I'm looking at the calendar right now. So just keep in mind, the one constitutional requirement of the legislature is to pass a balanced budget. And so that is the last thing on the last day, right? So legislative day 60, which this year is March 24th, we talk about the revenue estimate, and that begins before the session begins. But then as As taxes are filed, as quarterly taxes are filed, we get updates. Then legislative day 61, March 25th, is the last day to introduce appropriation bills, revenue bills, bills proposing referenda. So even that late in the session, day 61 of 90 days, that's the last day to introduce. But then, let's see, legislative day 80, which is April 20th, is amendments to appropriation and revenue bills, revenue estimating resolution. I mean, it goes very late. And even just in the past, well, on Monday, in that marathon Senate session, we passed basically a placeholder bill, which it just has a very broad title. I think it was generally revise revenue policy or revenue, revenue bills. I mean, honestly, what could you not fit under that title? But basically, it's what we will need in the last days of the session to to tie everything up and make sure that we have a balanced budget. So yes, I mean, and then typically when we need to suspend the rules in the last couple days to balance the budget, that's a pro forma thing. We can suspend the rules and, and we do. It just really for the purpose of the appropriations and the appropriations committee in the House and finance and claims in the Senate getting together and buttoning up that budget.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. So I think what I hear when you say that is we have a lot more opportunity to engage in the outcome of what's happening in the second part of the session. So, we've been encouraging a lot of people to contact their legislators, testify, write letters to the editor, all these things that show that we are paying attention, and we're not going to stop paying attention just because it's the second half of the session. And so do recognize that there's a lot more opportunity to be involved, to engage, and influence and call out hypocrisy when we see it, and we're seeing it all the time. So just know that, like, I'm just going to be hounding on that. There's more to do, and there's more wins that we can have. We've had some, we can keep having them. So let's not forget that. So there is one question about the broadband bill that flipped, and that was House Bill 422, which would have allowed towns and cities in Montana to own broadband infrastructure and utilities. And that was actually carried by Kelly Cordum, representative here in Gallatin. It passed on the second reading in the House and then dramatically failed on the third reading. So Alice, do you have any insight onto that?
Yeah, that was a bit dramatic. I think a couple different things that I've heard. Number one, the telecom lobby decided to come out against it, and we have a copy of the letter that they sent to everyone, but just given how tight things were, I would imagine there was a lot of personal outreach as well. So that's one. So it shows you what happens when a lobbyist works really, really hard to crush something. There are some question marks around why the lobby didn't come in before and came in between second and third. So that's one. Two is
it would die on its own, and then they realized, oh geez, that was a strong second reading. I guess we better kill this thing dead overnight.
Yeah, I think that's right. That they probably weren't expecting, and it passed with flying colors the first time on second, which is amazing. So that's one. Number two, there was, I think, just a lot of angst in general, and probably not a lot of goodwill from Republicans. So kind of an appetite to flip on something. Three, broadband is part of the package, that expanding broadband is part of the package of policy priorities that our Democratic caucus is putting forward. And so I think in some ways too, it was an easy one to go whack. We don't want any, we're not interested in helping Democrats achieve their policy goals. And then I think four, I think if we saw between second and third reading on Monday and Tuesday, a handful of Republican bills died, and then we saw 2 Democratic bills that passed second die on third, and both of them were legislators who aren't in the building. And it's just really hard when you're not in the building to intercept those conversations. And I was talking to Kim Abbott, our minority leader, about it, and she was saying, if I had realized that was happening, it would have been, we all could have kind of prevented that more than we did. But I think it's another really hard part of being absent. And I just want to acknowledge that it is so unsafe in the building, and so the choice to show up and be present in the building is putting ourselves and people around us in jeopardy. And also, it's hard to be as effective, especially as a freshman, when you're not in the building. And so it's just an interesting example of, I think Kelly's bill is an interesting example of the tensions and just challenges of being a legislator and navigating all of that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alice. Some of those I hadn't thought about. I knew that corporate lobbyists had, the lobbyists had weighed in on that bill, but yeah. So it is now a little after 8:30. I don't want to keep anyone any longer, but I just want to say thank you for being here tonight, JP and Alice, and everyone who joined, asked questions. We're doing one more of these tomorrow with Representative Cordum and Representative Staffman, talking about access and equality, kind of the bigger, the social engineering bills that we've seen, and also like the voting rights attacks and those kinds of bills that we've seen. So they serve on some of the more active committees for the first half of the session. So that's what we're doing tomorrow night. So join us. We'll start at 5:30 p.m. It's the same link that you joined for tonight. So feel free to come and join, ask questions, bring your questions, tell your friends, bring a drink if you would like. I may have one by tomorrow evening because it's Friday. So they are recorded. We will post them and share them. Yes, Dwayne, thank you. And again, Senator JP Pomnichowski, Representative Alice Buckley, thank you. It is always a pleasure to be in the same room with you, even if it's virtually. It's an honor, as always.
Thank you, Democrats. This is the friendliest room that we've been in for 2 months. So thank you. It's great to be with you.
Great to be with you all. Please go enjoy the rest of your break, get some sunshine, get some fresh air, get away from your screens, and know that we have your back when you start again on Monday.
Thank you all.
All right. Bye. Take care.